So are these the best shoes for the Camino? Hi, I'm Michaela. I've walked 3 different Camino de Santiago routes now, and in this video I'll talk you through my go-to shoes on the Camino. They're arguably one of the most popular shoes on the route, and that's the Hoka Speedgoats. But don't just take my word for it. I surveyed almost 300 pilgrims earlier this year on their favorite shoes that they wear on the Camino, and these came out as the #1 most worn shoe. In fact, 1 in 5 people surveyed who had walked the Camino chose these shoes. So are these right for you? In this video, I'll talk you through the features of the shoes, what I like about them, what I don't like about them, and you can decide. Now this video will focus on shoes for the Camino, but I understand that you're probably putting together your packing list and really trying to find all the right gear for you. So if you're interested, I have linked my packing list below. This is my exact packing list I have used on my Caminos now, and it includes links to gear that I use myself and recommend. So definitely check that out. I have also included a link to my full packing video above and in the description as well. In addition, if you do like these shoes and are interested after this video, I have included a link below for you to check those out. Or you can also type in the URL unanchoredpassenger.com/speedgoats. Now, before we dive in, I will say this video is not sponsored in any way. I just truly believe in these shoes. I've used them on all my Caminos. I feel like they work perfectly for me, and I don't want to try any other shoe. So I thought I would put this video together for you in case it's helpful. That said, Hoka, if you want to work together, let me know. I do also want to acknowledge that just because these shoes worked really well for me and worked well for tons and tons of other pilgrims, that doesn't mean they're the right shoe for you. Everyone's feet are different. Everyone's gait is different. Their preferences on shoes and what they like really all vary from person to person. So I encourage you, even if you're sold after watching this video, try on a few different pairs of shoes, see what feels best for you, and then try them out for a while afterwards. Don't just settle on one shoe immediately and commit to it for your hike. Now, if you're just starting your research into shoes to wear on the Camino, you might be asking yourself, now really, do I really want a pair of trail running shoes, first off, and a pair of non-waterproof shoes? The answer is yes, and I will walk you through a few reasons why. I know a lot of you are probably initially thinking hiking boots, and that's what I wore myself on my first Camino. Spoiler alert, it did not end well, and I was actually in a lot of pain. To be fair, those were not the right boots for me, but I had a lot of issues, and now I swear by trail running shoes. For a few reasons. First off, they're a lot more comfortable than hiking boots and breathable, which is important. When you're walking so far every day and it's hot, your feet will naturally get hot in your shoes. So you want something that breathes well so the sweat can get out. You do want something that's a little bit more cozy on your foot, I think. And this is a preference, but personally, I love very cushioned shoes. I think when you're walking 10, 20 miles a day for weeks, you want your feet to be as comfortable as possible. And hiking boots just aren't built for that kind of comfort over the long term. Trail running shoes are also a lot lighter, which, that doesn't necessarily matter if you're going up a mountain in one day for just a day hike and coming back down and, resting afterwards. But when you're walking so far day after day, then that weight really does add up over time. So it is really nice to have more lightweight shoes. If you're like me and you like the added ankle support of boots, you might still be skeptical of what I'm saying. And I get it. I've been there. Back in 2017, I sprained my ankle really badly just walking around the streets of Chiang Mai, Thailand, not even doing anything, not like hiking or anything. And ever since then, even though my ankle's been fine, I've just been very nervous about spraining it again. So, usually I go for hiking boots, and I still use boots myself when I do day hikes for that reason in particular. But since I've switched to trail runners for the Camino, I've really been converted. A lot of the Camino routes, you will have some tough terrain, but it won't be so bad that you're really worrying about an ankle sprain. To be fair, I've only hiked the Frances and the 2 Portuguese routes from Porto. I have not done the Primitivo or the Norte, which are notoriously 2 of the hardest routes. So you may prefer a little more stability there, but honestly, I think it would probably be better to just still go with the trail shoes and tape your ankle potentially. Obviously, that's between you and your doctor, and everyone has their own situation, but I really don't think the Boots are necessary for that extra ankle support. In the Camino, you are walking along roads a lot of the time, walking on fairly nicely manicured, I guess, paths. While there are some rugged sections, it's not like hiking a 14er or going up, something really technical. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But again, that's between you, your doctor, your own situation. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, some pilgrims choose to walk in running shoes instead of trail shoes. While I do think a lot of the Camino routes, regular running shoes are just fine, I do still recommend trail shoes because there will be times when you need that extra traction. So just to put it into perspective, I hiked the Camino Português routes earlier this year, and those routes are known as being some of the easier Camino routes. That's not to say they're easy, but they're generally a lot flatter than most routes. And there is a little bit more road walking, I would say. But there is this one section I remember distinctly between Redondola and Pontevedra where it does get almost more like your typical kind of hiking trail, and it's a little bit more rugged at times in the woods with some kind of steep inclines. And I did see a couple men who were biking the Camino, and one of them was like struggling to get his bike up this section, and somebody had to help him. So even though most of like the Portuguese routes are a good example, like most of those you could get away with running shoes, but just think about there are these little pockets where you will want the added traction of trail shoes. These are the trail shoes that I wore on those Caminos, so they're very worn down. Let me see if I have a good example, but you can kind of see where that traction was on the shoes. Some of it's still actually looking shockingly good after 300 plus miles, but yeah, you want that added traction and grip so that you can be confident on the trail and don't injure yourself because you're slipping because your shoes don't have much of a grip. So now, why do you want to avoid waterproof shoes? Well, I have to say, I feel like everyone I know who has tried waterproof shoes on the Camino has gotten blisters. If that's happened to you, definitely comment below. I'd love to hear your experiences with waterproof shoes on the Camino or in other scenarios. But basically, the issue there is when your feet are sweating. In a waterproof shoe, that sweat can't get out. So it just sits in your shoe and they can take a long time to dry. This just creates an environment where your feet can get a lot more blister prone, especially if you're hiking in like a warm climate. Waterproof shoes just are not a good idea. I've heard, they can be a good fit if you're hiking like in the winter time. So if you're doing a winter Camino, maybe. That's not really my area of expertise, but if you're walking in the summer, you generally want to stay away from them. And I know it sucks when your feet get wet, right? Like Galicia is one of the rainiest areas in Spain. That's northwest Spain where the Camino ends. So you're bound to encounter at least some rain on your Camino. Maybe you'll get lucky and you won't, but if you do, your feet probably will get wet. But in non-waterproof shoes, they typically dry out faster than waterproof shoes. So keep that in mind. I highly recommend avoiding the waterproof shoes. All right, so now let's just talk through the official specs of the shoes from the Hoka website. I'm going to go ahead and read my notes here so I don't get anything wrong. So the type of shoe, of course, these are a trail running shoe. That means they're really good for rugged trails and a variety of terrain. The weight, they are 8.2 ounces or 232.5 grams. And that's for a women's size 8. So, depending on your size, that weight can vary a little bit. The heel to toe drop is 5 millimeters. So what that means is the drop in the shoe from where your heel is to your toe. So most shoes do have somewhat of a heel to toe drop, but Ultra, if you've heard of that trail running shoe company, they're really known for having zero drop shoes. So I've never tried them myself, but those are also very popular on the Camino. I'll link to some of those popular shoes below, as well as my full article on the best shoes for the Camino de Santiago and my full results from that poll that I mentioned. But yeah, zero drop shoes, my understanding is that can really take a lot of getting used to because most shoes, they have a drop. And then in terms of stability, these shoes are neutral, cushion. Hoka calls the cushioning of these shoes balanced, but I pretty much consider it like a maximum cushion. Like I feel like Hoka shoes in general are some of the most cushioned shoes out there. These do not have a rock plate. Some trail running shoes will have a rock plate in the bottom. That's kind of extra protection. So if you're doing tons and tons of hiking on like really rugged, rocks and surfaces, that can be nice because it protects your foot a little bit more. For the Camino, I don't think a rock plate is probably necessary because, again, a lot of the surfaces you're walking on are pretty mellow. They have a Vibram Mega Grip sole, so that's kind of what I was talking about that traction on the bottom. In terms of sizing, they do tend to run a bit small. For those who need extra width, they do offer wide sizes. And then the average price, at least as of making this video, is $155. They're definitely pricey. I would say most trail shoes are unfortunately pricey these days. But the good thing is you can often find them on sale. So if you look way in advance of your Camino, just keep an eye out for any kind of like colors that maybe they're discontinuing or that aren't selling as well. You know, those can often go on sale, or whenever they make the latest version of the shoe. You know, these shoe companies tend to update the shoes, maybe not every year, but maybe every few years. Then those older model shoes usually go on sale. And then just to tell you about my experience with these shoes specifically, I walked in the Hoka Speedgoat 5 for most of the Camino Frances. You know, like I said, I started in those boots and then I started having issues, and then in Santo Domingo de la Calzada, I switched. I was able to buy Hoka Speedgoats there. First time I'd ever tried them. Started wearing them right out of the box. So in that hike on the Camino Frances in 2023, I walked 346 miles or 556 kilometers in the shoes. And then this past year, I wore the Hoka Speedgoat 6, so that's the newer model on the Camino Português Central from Porto. So that was 151 miles or 243 kilometers. And then I wore that same pair again on the coastal and spiritual variant routes on the Portuguese. And that was 175 miles or 282 kilometers. By the way, I am putting out videos on my hikes on those routes. So if you're interested in learning more about the Camino Português, definitely check those videos out. I'll link those below and above as well. But yeah, as you can see, in my first Camino, I got almost 350 miles out of these shoes. And in my second and third, in total, I spent over 300 miles in these shoes. Great, so now I figured I'd just kind of run through the various features of the shoes, talk more about them, what I think, what I like, what I don't like. So just starting with weight, like I said, you know, trail running shoes in general are a very lightweight shoe, and I feel that with these. I feel very comfortable walking in these, and I don't ever feel like there was a time where I felt like, oh my gosh, like my feet feel so heavy, like it's hard to take a step. I felt very like light on my feet, so I do like that about these shoes. And then, like I mentioned, they have that 5mm heel to toe drop. This is considered kind of an average drop, and I feel like it works well for me. You know, theoretically, I think a heel to toe drop like that kind of like helps encourage your foot to go up and down like this. I'm not an expert there, but yeah, it kind of helps your foot just naturally walk along. But yeah, this is like a pretty normal heel to toe drop that we're used to in a lot of our shoes. So, you know, that didn't really take any getting used to and just felt normal. And then with a neutral amount of stability, I feel like these shoes have enough structure to help your foot feel supported, but then at the same time, enough flexibility to really like move around. You know, you can kind of see like the sides are like fairly stiff, but you know, they're pretty flexible at the same time. But then at the same time, you know, the shoe sole is very stiff. So I like that. Some people might want more stability or less. Now, in terms of cushion, this is absolutely my favorite feature of these shoes. Like I said, they have such a great amount of cushioning. And actually, my go-to shoes when I'm marathon training and running are Hokas as well because of that amazing cushioning. I feel like, at least for me, when you're walking 10 to 20 miles a day for like weeks and weeks on end, having any kind of extra cushioning really makes a difference. So that's my personal preference. I will say some people I've heard prefer less cushioning because, you know, the more cushioning you have, the higher your foot does sit off the ground, and then it is a little bit harder to feel the ground underneath you. So that is something to keep in mind, and I think this is just one of those things you have to try on the shoes for yourself and see what you like, what you don't like. But for me, I just absolutely love it because I feel like I'm walking on a cloud. And I will say, like I said, you know, I have had ankle issues in the past, but I feel like my feet feel stable enough in here that I don't worry about rolling my ankle too much. But I know that is another concern that some people have with more cushioning, so that's something to consider. All right, and then in terms of the general fit, like I said, they do tend to run a little bit smaller. And also, I would say on the Camino, you want to keep in mind that your feet will probably swell. If you've never done a long distance hike like that before, that's taking place day after day after day, you don't really know how your feet are going to react, but they probably will swell up. For that reason, I really encourage you to consider getting a half size to a full size larger. I think on my first Camino, I only went a half size larger. But then on this Camino, I was trying them on, and like the half size larger, at least to me, felt almost like the correct sizing I would wear in daily life. So I ended up going a full size larger than my normal shoe size. Now, I think maybe my only complaint in terms of fit is that the tongue is kind of short on these. But, that's not really a huge deal to me. Otherwise, I really like it. It's just hard to kind of like get the shoe on and adjust it with it being so short. Now, in terms of grip, I feel like the grip on these was great. As you can see, they've definitely worn down after my 300 plus miles on the Camino Portuguese. But, I always felt very strong and didn't feel like my feet were going to slip and slide as I was hiking. And actually, on the Camino Portuguese Central route, I had like a torrential downpour day on the day that I was basically hiking like a real hiking route. This is when you get to the highest point on the central route. You're in the woods, you're kind of going up some rocks, kind of slick and muddy in some areas. And like these shoes did great. Like I never worried about slipping. I think pretty much any trail shoe should be pretty grippy, but I felt great with these. Yeah, and then in terms of breathability, like I said, trail shoes generally, if they're non-waterproof, they should be pretty breathable. And that's true for these. I would say on that day when it was super rainy, like my shoes were absolutely soaked. I had to wade through like puddles. Like the trail basically like turned into a river at one point. I have a whole video on this if you want to check it out. It was not good for my shoes. But by the next morning, I don't think they had totally dried, but they were mostly dried. Like these trail running shoes are so breathable that they do dry pretty quickly. And then when it comes to like protection for your feet, these aren't going to be as protective as something like a boot or a hiking shoe, where you've got that thicker, more durable outsole. But I did feel like my feet were pretty well protected, and I didn't get any holes or anything in these shoes, as you can see. So I think they're, if you're doing something super rugged, you probably want something more intense. But, for the Camino, I think the Hokas provide perfect protection there. In terms of durability, I would say these shoes have held up really well considering I took them on over 300 miles of trail. I do think the Camino does wear shoes out a little bit more than you would normally. First off, it isn't ideal for trail shoes to be on a surface like a road for a long amount of time because that does wear down these traction lugs on the bottom. So that's one thing. Also, when you're hiking day after day after day, your shoes really don't get a break. So they're really getting just that pounding over and over without getting much of a rest. So I think that is another flag. The Camino is just really going to be harder on your shoes. And then also, of course, since you're hiking with a pack on, that puts added stress on these kind of shoes compared to if you were just like a trail runner running in the woods, just carrying like a few items. I think they performed really well. Like I feel like I could still take these out on some hikes. Obviously, some of the lugs have started to really get worn down, but I think getting over a little over 300 some miles is a pretty good test. If anyone here has worn them along the whole Camino Frances, I'd love to hear from you since, I got my shoes a little bit later into the hike. I didn't wear them for the whole thing, but yeah, would love to hear from you on durability because I have heard some folks complain about durability about other shoe brands just not lasting the whole way, but at least for me, I feel like they've held up really well. Then when it comes to feel right out of the box, I think these shoes are great. Like I said, on the Frances, I was desperate. My feet were dying. I was afraid I was going to have to drop out of the Camino until I got Hoka Speedgoats. And thank God they're so cozy and comfortable on your feet right out of the box. You really don't have to break them in like you do a hiking boot. Like I think hiking boots, they say you really need to walk like 30 to 50 miles in them before they're really broken in. But trail running shoes, typically you really don't need to break in. That said, of course, you should try them out on your own for a while before you use them, but you really don't need to break them in. They're really cozy right out of the box. Okay, and then a very important feature to discuss, shoe color. Obviously, this actually isn't the most important feature, but you know, for a lot of us, it's fun. And personally, I don't want a pair of shoes that I'm like, oh, these are ugly. Like, I really love having fun running shoes. Hoka, I feel like, has some of the best shoe colors on the market. I feel like these are not a great example because these aren't quite as vibrant and fun, but they often have, you know, like oranges and like really bright, fun colors and color combos. I mean, I did really like these because of the kind of turquoisey blue. Currently, I looked up the Hoka shoe colors, and they have one that is a light blue, lavender, and seafoam green. That sounds really pretty. A dark lavender and light lavender, a cherry and dark purple, and navy and turquoise. And while shoe color is more of a fun thing, I do think there is added benefit to having brightly colored shoes, just because on the Camino you will be doing a lot of road walking. Anything you can have on you that makes you more easily seen by cars, I think, is helpful. So, you know, that's just another bonus to having brightly colored shoes. Now, I will say I was a little bit nervous before I got these latest Speedgoats, the 6s, because I had read some really bad reviews from some folks on the Speedgoat 6 versus the Speedgoat 5. And I'll talk through the differences in those models in a minute, but honestly, after using them, I didn't notice a difference. I mean, it had been 2 years since my last Camino, of course, but I really still love the shoes. Didn't see any other changes, really. Didn't know, you know, if you had told me it was the same shoe, I would have believed you. But for this video, I did look up the specific changes they made to the 6, just to help inform you as you're thinking about this shoe. So, at least according to Runner's World, they claim Hoka updated the 6s to improve durability in the upper and the midsole. They added reinforcements in the midfoot to help keep your foot locked into place. And they did make it a slightly narrower shape, but added a softer mesh in the forefoot area that allowed for more movement. So I don't know, maybe because they kind of changed the shape and added some of those reinforcements, maybe some people bought like the same exact size and had issues. Like I said, I think I did end up buying these a half size bigger than I did before, which is actually a full size larger than my typical shoe. So maybe that was why some folks were, you know, complaining about the latest version, but I really didn't have issues, like I said, and I still love these shoes. I'm still going to buy these shoes and wear them on every single Camino, probably. Now, as you're thinking about buying shoes for the Camino, I thought I would give you just a few tips to keep in mind. At the top of this video, like I said, not every shoe is perfect for every single person, right? We are all unique. We all have different feet, different walking gaits, different preferences in our shoes. So even if you've liked what you've seen in this video, you know, I definitely encourage you to check out the Speedgoats. And reminder, I've included a link for those below, or you can use the URL unanchoredpassenger.com/speedgoats. But while you try those, try on other shoes too, because you might be surprised. You might find a different pair of shoes that you like better, and that's totally fine. Number 2, like I said, consider getting a half or a full size larger than what you usually wear, just because your feet will probably swell. Obviously, you don't want to get a shoe that's going to cause you to like trip and fall when you're hiking, but as long as you feel comfortable enough in that bigger shoe walking around before your feet have swollen, I think that should be fine. Number 3, like I said, don't buy Gore-Tex or waterproof shoes. You know, you want that breathability factor because that will help prevent blisters. As you are figuring out the right size shoe for you, make sure you wear the socks that you're planning to wear on the Camino. I usually recommend merino wool hiking socks. I'll link the pair below. That is one of my favorites that I always use on the Camino. And those are a bit thicker than your typical socks. So you want to make sure as you're trying on shoes, you are using those socks that you plan to use too. And then lastly, I highly recommend purchasing your shoes from a store like REI, where you have, as an REI member, up to 1 year to return a pair of shoes, even if you've worn them. I was talking about those boots that really didn't work out well for me, and thankfully I bought those from REI, so I was able to get all of my money back on those boots, even though I had walked something like 50 or maybe even 100 miles in them. And of course, these aren't the only shoes to consider for your Camino, so be sure to check out the link to my article below on all the best shoes for the Camino de Santiago. That article runs through more popular models and more results from that polling I did of almost 300 pilgrims. So check that out. You know, there's a bunch of options. Some of the top popular options after the Speedgoats are the Ultra Lone Peaks, the Ultra Olympus, the Merrill Moab hiking shoe, which technically is different than a trail running shoe and could be a good option if you're looking for something that's kind of in between a trail running shoe and a hiking boot, and then the Topo Athletic TerraVenture. So check out that article to learn more about those shoes, as well as to learn more about some of the other shoes that folks mentioned, because there are tons of great shoes out there, and I'm sure there's a good option for you, but you might just have to try on a few pairs to figure out what that is. Well, I think it's no surprise why the Hoka One Speedgoats are such a popular shoe on the Camino, between their cushioning, their strong grip, and their ability to handle anything from, cobblestones to roads to rugged trails. They're really a great option that work well for a lot of people, and this is why they're the number one shoe, arguably, on the Camino. But of course, like I said, there are those other options out there, and everyone's foot is different, everyone's gait is different. We all want different things. Now, I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a pair of shoes that have worked well for you on your Camino or other backpacking trips that you think other folks watching this should know about, definitely let us know in the comments below. Or, if you've had a really bad experience with a pair of shoes, we'd love to hear about that too. I'm, of course, just one person with one experience, so I'm always looking to hear from others who have walked the Camino and, what's worked well for them. And if you did like this video and you think the Speedgoats could be a good option for you, then definitely check those out in the link below, or you can use the URL unanchoredpassenger.com/Speedgoats to check those out. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe. That helps me reach more people prepping for the Camino just like you. And thank you so much for being here, and buen Camino.